Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This episode of True Murder is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest way to create a beautiful website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Start a free trial today. No credit card required. Experience Squarespace at squarespace.com and enter offer code TRUEMURDER for a 10% discount. Dr. Katherine Ramsland wades through the heavy fog surrounding the Moors murders, a series of high-profile child killings committed by Scottish sadist Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Kim Cresswell churns the stomach with her unbelievable account of the atrocities committed by Fred and Rosemary West. Carol Ann Davis looks at one of the greatest abuses of police power in English history, the entrapment of Colin Stagg for the 1992 Ripper-style murder of blonde beauty Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common. Meanwhile, the real killer, Robert Napper, was already confined to Broadmoor asylum for the 1993 evisceration murder of Samantha Bisset and the rape and deadly suffocation of her infant daughter. To top it all off, Edgar-Award-winning author Burl Barer makes his Serial Killer Quarterly debut, lending his highly original voice to an intriguing re-examination of the murders ascribed to Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, and the phenomena of homicidal fame. Robert J. Hushowski, Aaron Elliott, and Kim Cresswell also look at three comparably notorious historical London slayers in their pieces on creepy old John Christie, acid bath vampire George Hay, and Jack the Ripper suspect and bride poisoner George Smith. The subject of this evening's episode is Serial Killer Quarterly with my special guest, journalist and author and publisher, Lee Mellor. Welcome back to the program, and thank you very much for agreeing to this interview, Lee Mellor.
It is always a pleasure to have a conversation, whether it's on air or off air, with you, Dan Zupansky. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. Thank you for this. First off, congratulations on a fantastic magazine, Serial Killer Quarterly. I want to ask this question. What was the genesis of Grinning Man Press, publisher of this, and Serial Killer Quarterly? Tell us what was the genesis of this. Tell us where the idea came from, why, and tell us about it.
Well, I suppose I had just finished writing my second book, which I had published through a conventional publisher, which is Dundurn Press out of Toronto. And though the book was selling well, I wasn't seeing the kind of returns on it that I really wanted to. And this whole idea of having a profession as a writer, it seems kind of untenable in the modern age. I'd always been brought up and told that I had great ability with writing, and so I just thought, as a little kid, hey, this is going to be my future doing this. And it's not that I've been unsuccessful in it. I've had 2 books published, and they're on the shelves of Chapters right now, but the returns that you get from it, as you probably know, Dan, they're just so low. So I started to, as I was trying to advertise my book online, I was meeting up with other people who were doing this self-publishing and doing ebooks, and I'd always stayed away from this ebook thing. To me, books were like a precious thing that I wanted to hold. I'm sick of looking at a screen. I like the fibrous feel of a book in my hand, so I'd always sort of just ignored that part of it. What happened is I got involved in another project, which for reasons I won't go into, didn't pan out, where I was going to be part of an ebook anthology. And through that, I met all these people who were, I found out that were doing really a lot better than myself, selling ebooks, and on the topic of true crime, that is. And so I started to think, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could put out this, a magazine, because people are doing e-books, but I'm not seeing e-magazines. And I would love it if there was like a high-quality detective magazine type product that we could put out now, something with a little bit more class than the sort of pulp semi-porn stuff that used to be printed back in, the 70s, 60s, 50s, that kind of thing. And so I just started looking into this possibility. I told a friend about the idea. He actually writes for it, Aaron Elliott, and he said, that sounds like a terrific idea. I'd be happy to finance it. I said, okay, well, that's fallen into place. I'll just reach out to a couple friends, because I'm a criminologist too, so I know a few people. So I first spoke with Katherine Ramsland. I said, well, what do you think about writing for this? And Katherine Ramsland agreed. Great, good start. I asked Michael Newton. Yeah, he wanted in too. Okay, this is starting to really go somewhere now. And then I get Harold Schechter and Kathy Scott and Burl Barer, and the next thing I know, I've got this completely fantastic publication, and I've got like the next 3 years planned out for it. So really, this was just a little idea I had germinating in my mind after seeing the whole e-publishing thing and how it was going. And I was just astonished by how many people wanted to participate in it and the caliber of writers we got. And so when an opportunity like that comes up, you don't go, you take it.
Now, you talk about you were very encouraged by all these people coming aboard. A very prestigious group indeed, Ramsland and Harold Schechter and Burl Barer, Kathy Scott, Michael Newton, like you mentioned. Never mind all the other really good authors that were on board on this Serial Killer Quarterly as well.
Oh yeah,
but
our staff authors are great too. And I mean, if I mentioned everyone that wrote for us that is a terrific writer, I'd just be like doing a grocery list. But yeah, we have a regular contributing staff authors: Robert Hashowski, Kim Cresswell, Aaron Elliott. I contribute a lot, and I mean, even it's always consistently good. I don't think we've had a weak article, and if we ever did, I would have rejected it. But yeah, it's a terrific group. Very proud of what we're doing.
Now that's a good segue, because I want to know what your criteria is for including stories in this series, because this is, from all this true crime stories, from all the stories involving murder and killers, you have an incredible selection. So tell us what your personal, because you and Aaron are involved in selecting this, I would imagine, making the final decision. Tell us what the criteria is. What it is that interests you to include these stories in Serial Killer Quarterly?
Okay, well, so the editorial stuff is that's basically all me. Aaron does most of the financing and a bit of the writing. What happens is I start with a theme. So the themes we did last year, and we did 5 issues. We did one per quarter plus a bonus Christmas issue, so I just came up with some themes that I thought would be interesting. So issue 1 was 21st Century Psychos, and we looked at how serial murderers in the 21st century and the kind of changes that we began to note in the trends in the 21st century. Then I looked at 1 Partners in Pain, which is basically team killers, unsolved in North America. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then Cruel Britannia, an issue on British killers. And then we did our special Christmas issue, was just called Body Harvest, and that was about prolific American killers. So what I do is I start with a theme, and then I realize that I need, say, 2 to 3 feature-length articles. That's about 7,000 words. And so what I do is, and then after that, usually about 4 smaller articles, 3,500 words. So what I do is I approach sort of our stable of authors, and I say, hey, here's the issues that we've got coming up this year. Here's some potential stories for them. You can always pick your own if you know of another case, and I'll gladly publish that too. But here's some suggestions, and people are the authors are pretty eager to swoop up those cases and to write about them. So that's sort of how the process works.
Okay, once you have that process, now, as a unique publishing entity, publishing company, we'll say, somebody is publishing in this really interesting time, how does that work in terms of how much assistance do you have, how much editing, how much content editing, how much free rein do you give to these really experienced authors?
Well, I do the editing, and depending on the author, or sometimes I get the varying qualities of articles. They're always good fundamentally, but sometimes I have to restructure sentences a little bit just to make them more readable, or sometimes this is basic editing I do with all kinds of stuff. You'll get someone that will start a sentence with the word he 4 times in a row, and I don't care what the person's credentials are at that point. That is wrong objectively to me. So yeah, I'm changing it. But generally, some authors I have to edit more than others. But I always get something that's fundamentally good from them. The process moves too quickly for me to really ask for their permission to change up what they've done. But then again, it's always just cosmetic, the editing process. I don't change ideas. And in fact, that's the one thing I'll say that I'm so proud of about this magazine and that I love is that it's almost like a conduit for free expression. That is almost the ethos of Grinning Man Press as a company. It's like you can tell it however you want to as long as it's good. So as someone who's read the magazine, will have noticed the tone of, say, Burl Barer's article on Peter Sutcliffe is much different than, say, Katherine Ramsland's tone in the Ian Brady and Myra Hindley one. But
sure.
It's the allowing of people to use their own voices to look at this topic, this phenomena of serial murder, from just as many angles as possible. I like to think of it as just kind of free speech.
Yes, they do have a lot of character injected into the stories, and you can really see that in relatively short stories, and not what they're accustomed to, and seeing that over an entire book. So that's quite interesting that their character is really predominant in these articles. I wanted to also ask you, there's a lot of type of murder stories, and just like this program, which is the most shocking killers in true crime history, what is essentially the tone, more so the tone of the stories that you do pick?
Well, sorry, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. When you say tone,
well, what I say is more maybe the emphasis. Like I said, what I said is that this program, ideally, I think the audience especially appreciates those stories that are more shocking in nature. So what I'm asking is that maybe it's a rhetorical question, I thought, in that I see that is the overall, again, maybe tone is not the appropriate term, but the overall
criteria, sort of, yeah.
Yeah. More so, rather than...
Yeah, you know what? We don't really... Maybe it's because they come across as shocking because they're so effectively written. And I believe that when you write about this topic, it should shock people. I believe if you write about it in a sterile way that you're essentially lying, because these are shocking behaviors. This is horrific stuff. So, I mean, good writing is going to horrify people. But there is, say, in the second issue that we did, Partners in Pain, for some reason I found that there is a lot of these killers that kill in groups tend to be sexual sadists. Like the torture element really comes out. And when I initially had the authors select the stories that they wanted to do for that, I took a look at the list and I went, this is too much. Like, it's too much of the same thing. It's just torture. And so I actually wrote to a couple of them, and the authors are all very cool, too, with my editorial choices, and I want to thank them all for that while I have this podium. And I wrote to a couple of them. I said, look, would you mind it if we shifted that story over to another issue, because I've just got way too much torture in this one. You know, let's do something else. Let's do someone who kills in an act-focused way for money to switch things up a bit, and let's do a necrophilia case. And so I'd say that what we try to avoid is going for the same kinds of crimes. Yeah, that's it. So even though the issue will have an overall theme, such as 21st Century Psychos or Unsolved in North America or Cruel Britannia, within those issues you will find a whole myriad of different types of serial killers. The criteria is, you know, a serial killer, and that fits into that overall theme of the issue.
Right. What I introduced in the synopsis is basically a lot of, the information from one of your issues, which is Cruel Britannia, and very much I want to go through some of the titles of, because really we don't have much time to discuss any of these cases in depth at all, and don't want to give anything away because these stories are incredible. And if you think you've read, like I have, a lot of these stories, I thought I had read the definitive story on this, and to my great surprise and interest, I found incredible information that I hadn't read before, which is always fascinating to a guy like me who thinks he's read it all. So tell us a little bit about Cruel Britannia and what you found, and before we talk about your Jack the Ripper tour in London. So tell us about Cruel Britannia, why you felt it was important to talk about crimes in Great Britain. So tell us about that.
First of all, there's a personal element in that for me, in that I was born in England and immigrated to Canada. And so my parents would always pick up the British newspapers, and I would become familiar with some really horrific cases that were going on over there, which just didn't make headlines really, or weren't like a big deal in North America. But those were sort of stories that were, they became part of my lexicon. And so I knew there was a lot of really incredible serial killer stories coming from the British Isles, and I wanted to tell those. And also there's this true crime in the UK, and it's just there's such a market for it. It's like there's almost like Murder Obsessed over there. Even the fictional programs that come out almost indefinitely have something to do with homicide a lot of the time. So between those two factors, I thought, yeah, let's do a British issue. Plus, we got to admit that title is pretty cool, right? Cruel Britannia. Yeah. So between all those factors, I was like, yeah, let's do up one of these. And being kind of a walking serial killer encyclopedia, I just went to the authors and I said, hey, look, here's all these cool cases. Take your pick.
Yeah, well, before we start, too, I want to mention that the photos that you've chosen for this magazine are fantastic. And I especially I'm just a fan of black and white photos. It just add to the eeriness and to the photos themselves. But just tell us what, again, you had a different idea in the kind of photos you selected and the kind of, again, maybe I'm misusing the word, the kind of tone of those photos that you would include in your issues.
Exactly, yeah. I'm glad you noticed that. The ethos has always been, we're not making something that is visual murder porn, nor would I want the writing to be like that either. When you look back at those old True Detective magazines, they're basically women scantily clad with fearful looks on their faces being pushed into a trunk by a dominant male, which in itself is, I don't know, I'm not really big on censorship, but it's certainly, I don't think, it's not something I think is good, especially when children are reading it. And unfortunately, as we know, there are a lot of serial killers. Their first introduction to females, to sexuality and scantily clad or semi-nude female form or sexualized female was in this context through these detective magazines. And the last thing I wanted to be doing with this magazine is creating a whole new generation of Ted Bundys. At the same time, you don't want to make something that's like an academic journal, just something boring that doesn't convey the horror. So what I said to the William Cook, who does the covers, and to Northbound Creations, who are the graphic designers, I said, I want to go for a tone here which implies things more and is not so much sexual as it is eerie and horrific. And I think if your listeners check out the covers of our magazines, they'll probably see what we've accomplished in that regard.
Yes, and I'm more appreciative too that the trend in true crime books and all books in general are to use stock images, and I think as opposed to the way true crime books used to do with the victims and the killer and other images on the cover. I think there's some really cool true crime book covers, and I think this is more in keeping with really some great photographs, but keeping, like you say, that the class, and certainly not reverting to any kind of anybody to label murder porn or anything that would be considered tasteless. This is, I think, I'm very in agreement with you. This is very classy, and some really profound photographs in this that are included. So now let's talk about the actual characters that are in Cruel Britannia itself, and some characters I've never read about. And Arian Elliott writes about John George. Now, am I mispronouncing this? Is it Hay or Haig?
I believe it's Hay. That's the way I've always said it, yeah. John George
now
Hay.
What you have is, I'll just read what you have, and I really think it's interesting, the little captions that you have underneath these stories to introduce them for somebody that's interested in these articles. And
yeah,
so it says
I've got a little rule for that. No more than 25 words. So sometimes it sounds almost like a tabloid, but anyways, little tidbit for you there. Go ahead, sorry.
Yes. It's dapper con artist lures friends and business associates to their deaths in his London basement warehouse, rendering their bodies into goo in acid baths. And that's John George Hay. So tell us, tell us a little bit about John George Hay and why you included him in this series.
John George Hay is interesting in that he's mostly known for being a vampire because he claimed that he drank the blood of his victims. And so he got a lot of notoriety over that, and authors wrote about it without ever really questioning it. The truth seems to be more that he realized that if he said that, it would play into an insanity defense. There is no evidence at all that he did do it. He even fabricated victims. The guy was a psychopath. I've run the PCLR on him. He's a pathological liar. And essentially, John George Hay was just a con man, and he had gone to prison a few times for cons and for fraud. And while he was doing some reading in prison, he misinterpreted corpus was delicti, body of evidence, He
Right.
misinterpreted that to believe that if there was no body, that murder charges could not be brought against him. So with this in mind, and lacking the inhibitions of a normal person due to his psychopathic nature, when Hay was released from jail, he began to lure wealthy acquaintances into this warehouse in London on Gloucester Road, and I've actually been there. It's now like a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he would lure them down there. He would kill them quickly, usually with a gun or blunt instrument, and then in these warehouses, he would put the bodies into these acid baths and just leave them there, and over time they'd be slowly rendered into a goo. And I believe, I'm not looking at the number in front of me right now, but I believe he killed about 6 people this way before he was caught. And it was always financial. He would always trick them somehow into signing papers over to him, and or getting access to their money. And so he would, after he killed them, he would have to sustain this illusion a lot of the time that they were still alive, in order to keep milking money from their relatives. So I'll just give you one example. In one case, the first murder, it was a guy, Donald Swan. He didn't want to be drafted for the Second World War. So John George Hay said, okay, well, don't worry, I can get you out of this. We'll put you in hiding in Scotland, then he lured him down into the cellar, killed him, and rendered the body to goo in these acid baths. And then he pretends to Donald Swan's parents that the son is actually still alive and in hiding. And by doing this, he's able to start getting sums of money from them. So this was really a very clever, financially motivated killer, except when he finally came undone, as a lot of them do, he was a bit cocky about it, because he would openly said to the authorities, he said, I might have killed him, but there's no body, so you can't prove it. But what he didn't realize is that he had misinterpreted what a body of evidence means, and he was convicted, and all of a sudden, oh, wait, I did it because I like drinking blood because I'm nuts. So that's John George Hay in a rather large nutshell for you.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's a case. It's incredible, and the amount. What I find fascinating is that Aaron does the necessary research to find out that this started in prison, where he would get other prisoners to bring him little rodents, little animals, so that he could experiment with acid while he was in prison. So he really was preparing himself for when he was eventually released. So he really had a master plan to do his evil deeds.
Yeah, kind of
like
an ultimate organized killer, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. The next person that you feature is John Christie, and you call this article "Skeletons in the Alcove," and this is Robert J. Hushowski. Sexually inadequate hypochondriac murders his wife, neighbors, and 5 women in his bedbug-ridden Notting Hill apartment, having necrophilic sex with 4 of the latter. Tell us just a little bit about John Christie and the Skeletons in the Alcove.
John Christie is a really fascinating character, and I would like listeners to purchase the magazine to read about him, but if you want to see a great movie about the case, 10 Rillington Place with Richard Attenborough and John Hurt is really a terrific film about that case. Christie was essentially a really kind of meek, non-masculine character. He was born in Yorkshire, and he had a domineering father. He was kind of mollycoddled by his mother, and sort of we tend to form these narratives, I guess, about what it is, that key moment in the life of a serial killer that sends them on the pathway to whatever it is. With him, it was when he was sex with a girl as a teenager, and he was unable to perform. And I guess this girl, rather insensitively, went around telling everyone about it, and so everyone would ridicule him about it. Can't get it up, Christie, Reggie No Dick, things like that. And so this really leveled his self-esteem. And this is something, by the way, as an aside, that we often see in necrophiles, that they have very low self-esteem. Right. And so Christie ends up in the First World War, where he's exposed to mustard gas. And even though any kind of exposure to mustard gas is going to really mess you up, he's also a hypochondriac. So he starts to talk in this sort of whispery voice. But they determine that it's psychosomatic, that the mustard gas hasn't actually affected his ability to speak, that this is a psychosomatic thing that's going on. He eventually marries a kind of frumpy woman named Ethel, and from what I gather, they had virtually no sex life. They have no children, and they move into an area of London which is poor, people stacked on top of each other, and bed bugs, just the kind of place you wouldn't want to live. And it's here that I suppose over the years his pent-up his frustrations start to bubble to the surface. And while his wife is away, he has a rather interesting MO. Sometimes it's prostitutes that he kills. He brings them back to his apartment and strangles them. But other times it's women who are in need of medical help or abortions. And Christie he uses this demeanor of being a very timid and almost intellectual man to convince these women that he has some medical experience, and that if they come back to his apartment and use this device he has where they can inhale vapors, that he can cure them of various things, ranging from lung diseases to needing to have abortions. And so he pulls this trick on them, a number of women, but what he does is he lures them back to his apartment, and he hooks up, he puts this mask over their face, which is going into, I think it's called Friar's Balsam, some sort of inhalant, which is safe. But what they don't know is that he's also hooked it up to the gas pipe. So they go unconscious. As they're unconscious, he rapes them because, and this is an interesting paraphilia called somnophilia, he's able to perform with them when they are unconscious because he's not afraid of ridicule, and that goes back to the Reggie No Dick experience. And then after they're unconscious, he strangles them with a rope. Now, the first few victims, he just disposes of their bodies after that. But around the late 50s, he starts to just he hits that part of many serial killer cycles where they just kind of lose control of their impulses. And he kills his own wife. There's no evidence of sex, but it's more just to get her out of the way. And I think he hides her under the floorboards. And with her out of the way, he's now free to do this much more often. And now he can keep the bodies too. So he starts to do this with a number of prostitutes. And eventually, he moves out, and somebody else moves into the apartment. And they find that there's a fake wall put up, and when they tear down this wall, they find the bodies of about 2 to 3 women behind the wall. And then the manhunt is on for John Christie, who goes down as one of the most notorious serial killers in British history.
Lee, we're just gonna pause for a moment to talk about the sponsor of True Murder, this episode of True Murder, which is Squarespace. And I don't know if you happen to see the most recent Super Bowl and the really cool commercial for Squarespace with the dude, a.k.a. Jeff Bridges, but he has partnered with Squarespace to bring his unique project to life. Jeff and his friends have created an album of soothing and relaxing sounds, guided meditations, and stories designed to lull you to sleep. Visit Squarespace to see Jeff Bridges' amazing website, dreamingwithjeff.com. With Squarespace, you can create a unique, one-of-a-kind website. Squarespace features an elegant interface and beautiful templates with dedicated 24/7 customer support. Now, every website comes with a free online store and a free domain name with your first annual plan. Your website will scale to look great on any device, and with cover pages, you have a gorgeous one-page online presence in minutes. Whether you want to create a fantastic website or blog, an e-commerce store, portfolio, or all of the above, you can express your ideas powered by an elegant yet intuitive platform. Start a free trial today. No credit card required. When you sign up at squarespace.com, use the offer code TrueMurder for a 10% discount off your first purchase. I would like to thank Squarespace very much for the support of this episode of True Murder. Squarespace, build it beautiful. Now, Lee, we were talking about the first episode, or pardon me, Cruel Britannia, and we talked about John Christie and your article, Skeletons in the Alcove by Robert J. Husowski. Mm-hmm. You include this London murder travel diary, and you talk about the Jack the Ripper tour that you do with a man named John Chambers. So,
yeah, John, he is awesome.
Tell us a little bit about that whole experience that you document really very interestingly in Serial Killer Quarterly. Tell us a little bit about that tour.
I love it that you found it interesting because, you know, whenever you write a biographical piece, you're always got that thing in the back of your mind where you're going, am I just being narcissistic here? But so I'm thank you for that compliment. The London murder tour was really quite interesting in that I was in the UK for about 2 months for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons was to do some research for my PhD dissertation. As I said before, I'm a criminologist, and I was going by train to a place called Sidcup to meet with a police officer who had worked on the Colin, Ireland serial murders that took place in London in 1993, I believe, because that was an important case for my dissertation. And I figured, you know, while I'm heading in that direction, I may as well spend a night in London. I couldn't really afford to spend more than one night. So I found this kind of crappy hotel, and I decided I'm going to make this about the magazine. I'm gonna justify this by turning it into a magazine article. So I tried to hit as many of these sites in London that were associated with notorious serial murders as possible. So the hotel where I stayed in was very close to Gloucester Road, and Gloucester Road, of course, as I mentioned before, is the site of the workshop where John George Hay had turned these people into goo using his acid bath. In fact, it's right across from the tube station. It's a Kentucky Fried Chicken. So for the good of the magazine, the first thing I did when I got off the tube upon entering London was walked right across the street and ordered some Kentucky Fried Chicken and went down into the little basement there and ate the KFC, and then I took a photograph of the gravy so that it would make a nice juxtaposition with the article that Aaron had written about some sort of fleshy goo substance. And you know what? I must admit the KFC was better than I remembered. It's been a while since I had eaten it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now that's the big revelation of all of this. KFC is better than you think. There you go.
Yeah, I got all snooty about it, but I think it's one of those everything in moderation, and for me it was like a 10-year moderation type thing. I also went with the original recipe. That might have had something to do with it. So I hit that one spot there, and I mean, there's no. That's what I found very interesting about it. It's like that series of murders takes place, and what do they do with that location? They build a KFC and like a patisserie over top of it, and no one knows. Everyone's just walking past it, and I'm standing there trying to get a decent photograph as cars keep blocking my way and pedestrians, and everyone's looking at me like, why is he photographing a KFC? So no one really knows that these infamous murders had happened here. From there, I went to the hotel, put all my got all my stuff settled in the hotel, and then I decided to go on this Jack the Ripper tour, which is the complete opposite. So I ride the tube down to East Aldgate Station, and I'm hanging around there, and I just see this group milling around a guy with a top hat on, and I go, well, this must be the Jack the Ripper tour. I had called them ahead of time, and we'd done sort of a deal like, hey, get me on the tour for free, and I'm gonna write about it for the magazine. And it was what was fascinating to me was not only the number of people that were going on this tour, but the fact that the one crime would be almost like invisible, where the other is almost like a part of. It's almost like a tourist attraction, like the Tower of London. Right.
Sure.
That's it's interesting. Like, there's why is one so much bigger? And I guess it's that Jack the Ripper name. When you think of a serial killer, Jack the Ripper is sort of the number one. That's the first one everyone learns about. That's the only reason I can see. So I end up going on this tour, and it's fascinating. John Chambers, the guy doing the tour, he's got a great sense of humor, a real Cockney, but he's a historian too. But the kind of historian that everyone wishes they had as a history teacher in school, where he makes it entertaining, and he's memorized all these facts about Victorian London, every street, every pub at the time. And we're just basically doing the walk from site to site of where all the murders took place. And he has like a holographic projector, which he projects onto the walls that show you what it used to look like. And so that was only about £10, which I don't know, just off the top of my head, that's maybe like 14 Canadian dollars, for like a good hour long, entertaining. In that it was as funny as the topic could be, and jovial. Johnny sort of brought that aspect of it out, but it was also incredibly informative. And you get to it's one thing to read about Jack the Ripper, but to actually walk the distances and to see like how far apart the murder sites were and in relation to each other. It's a fascinating experience. So I would recommend that to anyone who goes to London to go on that Jack the Ripper walking tour they have. And the best thing, me with my sort of insider magazine status, is that after it was all done, I got to go for a pint with Johnny and his friend. So we went to a pub called the White Hart, where the conversation invariably turns to Jack the Ripper and serial murder in general, and we're sitting there drinking our ciders, and we only had about an hour or so. They had to be up in the morning to do another Jack the Ripper thing, and I had to be up to go see my detective, and the last thing I wanted to do was go with a hangover. So we say our separate way. We go our separate ways, say, hey, I'll meet up with you next time I'm in London, and I certainly plan to, because we had a great time. And it's only later that I realize that the White Hart pub that he took me to was once owned, or the landlord of it was a guy by the name of George Smith. And George Smith is a Jack the Ripper suspect, and confirmed serial killer who poisoned 3 of his wives in the early 1900s. And Kim Cresswell wrote a pretty terrific article on that in the same issue, Cruel Britannia. So then I was trying to make it to another part of London that same night, and I made a very, in retrospect, prudent decision to try and not get another murder site in, because I would have really screwed up my getting up early in the morning to go interview that detective. So, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Much more written about much more better in the article.
We're just going to go through a few of the articles that are in Cruel Britannia, and then maybe touch on a couple that are in the other issues of Cruel Britannia. Of Serial Killer Quarterly. Mm-hmm. Dr. Katherine Ramsland, again, the expert's expert, does Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, and it's called Switching on the Dark. 5 Manchester children and teens are raped and murdered as an existential exercise by Scottish nihilist Ian Brady and his English disciple lover Myra Hindley. We won't give anything away. This is just too much. As you talked about, Kim Cresswell talks about George Chapman, Surin Kozlowski, the Borough poisoner, Polish bone barber, and Ripper suspect poisons 3 wives in the turn of the century England. You also have, which I thought, because I just love Burl Barer, is Peter Sutcliffe, Yorkshire Ripper, or Yorkshire Ripoff by Burl Barer. And you talk about Bradford trucker Peter Sutcliffe, England's most notorious serial killer. Is he really responsible for 13 deaths attributed to him, or is he a nobody among nobodies? So I won't give anything away, because I think this is just an example how great and interesting and unique these articles really are in this magazine. But just tell us a little bit, for those that don't know, the controversy that is examined in this Peter Sutcliffe article, Yorkshire Ripper. Okay,
it's mostly built on the theory that I believe the man's name is Noel O'Gara, and he's from Ireland, and he claims to have met a man that worked for him. His name eludes me at the moment, and he believed that this man was the real Yorkshire Ripper. He doesn't deny that Peter Sutcliffe was also murdering women, but he says that this man, William Tracy, that's his name, he says that William Tracy is responsible for the bulk of these murders, and he's written a book about it, and he has quite a dedicated following. Now, there's some people that even in the police force that have come out and said, yes, he has a point here. This is we always knew that Peter Sutcliffe hadn't done all these killings, and it should be reinvestigated. And then there's the other side of it, which is just going, well, this is a conspiracy theory. A lot of it hinges on the fact that the DNA found on, I believe, one or more of the suspects was different than Sutcliffe's reported blood type. The problem is getting information on what Sutcliffe's actual blood type is, like now, and in being able to independently verify that. So Burl tackles a lot of that. He doesn't actually write a lot about the murders themselves, my take on it was that I looked at O'Gara's argument, and I looked at the timeline of the murders. And the first murder, according to O'Gara's website, would have been committed by Sutcliffe, and this would have involved mutilation. That's why they call him the Yorkshire Ripper, just like Jack the Ripper, Rostov Ripper, Andre Chikatilo, whatever. They're those guys that like to mutilate. And so I noticed that this first murder had involved some mutilation. And so if the next one was committed by this guy, William Tracy, and also involved mutilation, to me it seems more like Tracy was ripping off Sutcliffe. But then again, I go, well, how did this, considering it's only the second murder, how did Tracy know about the mutilation and the specifics of the mutilation, that, you know, where it occurred, the manner in which it occurred, in order to copy Sutcliffe. And so I became skeptical, and I would say, even though I haven't done anywhere near the depth of research that Noel O'Gara has done into it, based just on that observation I had as a criminologist, I concluded that probably maybe Peter Sutcliffe hadn't done all the murders, but I certainly didn't think that he was copying William Tracy, and I didn't see it as proof that William Tracy had committed any of the murders. Now, this guy William Tracy claimed to have done it and bragged about it, but yeah, we all know pathological liars, and we all know people that do false confessions. So, but it's still a very interesting argument, and it's worth looking at. And Burl does a good job of it. One of the things with that article that was the most challenging actually is Burl's tone is so, as I think you used the word irreverent. Did you use that word?
Sure.
You can't. Okay. And yeah, and it's like, okay, well, we're writing about murders here, and this has got much more of a sense of humor and a lightness about it than most of the other articles that we've published. And then I had to go back and think about what really is the ethos of this brand of Grinning Man Press, the publisher, and what is this magazine about? And I came back to that tenet that I had, that if it is a good article, I don't care in what voice it's written from or what moral standpoint it's written from, I'm going to publish it because I want the readers and myself and everyone who reads our magazine to see these issues from various perspectives. And so Burl's article on Sutcliffe was from a totally different perspective, and I think the magazine becomes a lot more. I think the magazine benefits from that because you're not reading the same tone all the time. Things are broken up. It's like a radio station. You don't want to keep hearing songs in the key of G 8 times in a row, right? You want some variation. So I think ultimately it's a good idea to do that, and so that's what we do. I got a real weird one coming up, written by Peter Vronsky for our next issue, where I was faced with a similar challenge, and I'm going to publish it.
Yeah, with Burl, I didn't read any controversial elements of it, but what I found is that very much like Burl, he likes to explore the underlying issues, even if they're and history-based, in terms of the phenomena that are underlying, in that police would like to wrap up everything nice and neat and not have these loose other suspects. He also talks about the phenomena of, just as you mentioned, the pathological lying that's evident in serial killers. So how much is true and how much is a self-aggrandization? No one quite knows. And then just the phenomena of the media itself, which are, again, have their own motivation, and sometimes that is synonymous with the prosecution and the police, and sometimes it isn't. So I think he explores all that and factors that all into the story as well. And I like I say, irreverent. It's just that's Burl Barer. He has nobody else can strike that balance between that sarcasm for those things I think which need to be criticized, and that's why I laugh, and just really the strict academia that this guy puts into it, and it seems very effortless in his work.
Yeah, and that's why he's a great writer, and we're honored to have him on board. I can't wait for his next article. And that's terrific. I mean, when I write, I tend to look at things more from how can I convey the horror of this story combined with sort of like a criminological analysis of it. But as you said, Burl is really looking at the aspects of media in it, and that's terrific. The more we look at these from different viewpoints, because it's about serial killers, but it doesn't need to be just through one lens. There's many ways you could write the Peter Sutcliffe case 8 different ways, from 8 different standpoints. So, yeah, and I think all of our articles have a little bit of something different to them.
Absolutely, and in keeping with that too, what you'd have is a lot of people know this, but this is, again, even more information, more in-depth, is the Fred and Rosemary West. You call this article Garden of Bones by Kim Cresswell. And another one I knew nothing about is Robert Napper, and you call this article The Destroyer, with Carol Ann Davis. And this is an aberrant police ethics leads to the prosecution of an innocent man for murder, while the true killer, a schizophrenic necromutiophile language in a mental institution. Yeah, there you go, a new word for me this evening.
Yeah, I coined it.
Again, then you have, just to top it all off, if that isn't enough, you have a preview of the next issue, which is Fatal Fetishists, and so then you do a preview about Jeffrey Dahmer and an article called The Tenant with Hauschowski again penning that, or doing that article. So we also have, that's just one of the issues, and then the next one you have is in the spring edition. So we really can't go through all of this, but really this one's called Partners in Pain. And you mentioned this before. This is you have William Burke and William Hare, Victorian serial killers.
Yeah.
Great stuff. You have Dean Corll, Elmer Hindley, David Brooks, The Game of Boys with Dr. Katherine Ramsland again, and you had John Duffy and David Mulcahy, Unique and Evil Bond with Carol Ann Davis, and you include stories on Leonard Lake, Charles Ng, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, Doug Clark and Carol Bundy, Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt. Again, another one. Yeah. Another one for me. So how many issues have you put out so far? And tell us a little bit about the latest issue.
Okay, so I've put out 5 issues so far, and so all those cases we listed in the British cases. I mean, that's just one issue. So this is literally the hundreds of pages of reading. So I think that what we charge for this e-magazine is a really good deal, and I really encourage your listeners to go to our website, serialkillerquarterly.com, and check it out. You can subscribe. I mean, we'll send it to your email as they come out. So what have we got coming up next? Okay. Well, Fatal Fetishists, because Peter Vronsky got so passionately into his article on Richard Cottingham, which was supposed to be 7,000 words, he ended up giving me 12,000. And normally I'd say, whoa, this is too much, this has got to go. But it was an amazing article, and I decided I've got to keep it. At the same time, that was going to bloat the magazine to just a huge size, and it would be rough on the graphic designers, rough on me as an editor, and we'd just be giving out way too much content compared to our other magazines. So Fatal Fetishists ended up getting split in 2 as a result of that. So our next 2 issues are Fatal Fetishists 1 and Fatal Fetishists 2. And the theme of both of these issues are individuals, serial killers that have specific paraphilias and or fetishes, and so each case represents a different one. For instance, I did an article on just a simple pedophile serial killer named Ronald Jebsen. We've got one on Dayton Leroy Rogers, who's a foot fetishist, and we've got ones on Stephen Griffiths, a cannibal. Richard Cottingham, that was Peter's article, a sexual sadist. So that's what we've got coming up. We're going to start exploring different fetishes and paraphilias in the next two issues.
And what was the summer edition? What were some of the articles in the summer edition?
Oh, the summer edition. I believe that was our Unsolved in North America, and that was the one where we had the honor of having Harold Schechter write for us. He did the 1885 unsolved murders of servant girls in Austin, Texas. Did a terrific job on it. And the cool thing about that is I had my friend and colleague Kenneth Maines, who works for the American ASOC. I'm drawing a blank on the acronym right now. Sorry, Ken. But we had him come in, and he looked at that case, and he looked at the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run article written by Michael Newton, and we included a sub-article in there by Ken where he did criminal profiles on both of those cases based on the articles, so that was pretty cool. I wrote a lot of content for that one, and I did one on the Zodiac Killer, which is almost impossible to put into 7,000 words just because the letters are so long.
Sure.
So I kind of let the primary source materials tell themselves. The letters tell us a lot about that. And then in one instance, I actually pumped myself into the head of the Zodiac and wrote from his point of view during one of the murders. So going back to that whole idea of writing from different perspectives, I wanted to really play with that in that particular article and to show who I thought he was in that moment during that murder. I also wrote an article for that one on a series of child murders in Montreal that remain unsolved, and that was actually an article I couldn't fit into my book Cold North Killers. I had to take it out, and so I just had it waiting in the wings, and I put it in there. That's a really fascinating case. I mean, if you're a Canadian, you definitely want to look at that one, because recently there's been an announcement that originally I think that they believed there was about four or five victims, and now they're looking at the possibility that there may be as many as 9 involved in that case. Kim Cresswell wrote about the Long Island serial killer. I would say that's probably in the 21st century. That's like the unsolved serial murder case. Would you agree with me there, Dan? That's the one that sort of everyone remembers and knows, and in the 21st century that they still haven't figured out.
I would say that's the one that's piquing people's interest. I think what's interesting is that even though serial killer stories dominate the bookshelves and in fiction dominate movies, they're almost a plot in almost everything. But I would think that just some of the developments and some of the killers, the one-off kind of killers, and the more the trend towards the spree killers and the people that kill their entire family is just. Yeah. I think that there's less. I don't know if there's interest, but there's less attention on serial killers just at this moment. But we're going back and finding out in history about these notorious serial killers that time seems to have almost forgot. And then thanks to incredible magazines like yours, you're bringing these stories back to life. And these stories today pale in comparison to some of these incredible true crime stories in history.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And as I said, we're not trying to do the same old thing where like, hey, do you want to read about John Wayne Gacy again? Like, we'll get around to him. But, it's not like that we've made the magazine a priority where we're going to take those cases that you already know everything about and just recycle them. We scatter a few of those in there, and, that's just part of good editing, in my opinion. But, I like to think that we bring a lot of cases that people have never heard of into the forefront. It's like, hey, take a look at this. Yeah, you didn't hear about them, but isn't this just as interesting? really. I mean, if you're in this not for the sensationalism, but because you really want to understand the mind of a murderer, victimology, criminology, if you want to find out about all the different permutations of this type of predator, maybe you should learn about some of the ones that haven't made international headlines. And so we're going to continue to do that with the magazine, although this year we are going to put in some of the more well-known names. I felt like the year one was a bit of a tease, and now we've got to pay off a bit, almost like a story arc, but we're still going to put in those fringe cases too.
What I think is incredible is that of course, the stories that I had never read before, and being a guy that's pretty well read in this genre, and still, so to me that's fascinating, and I think the audience is going to find that, the reader is going to find the same thing. Wow, these are stories that I didn't know anything about, and now I'm reading them, and they're fascinating, incredibly shocking, and yet in-depth stories, but just very, very concise. It's amazing how much information these incredible authors pack into a short space, basically. But I think that when you do the cases like Fred and Rosemary West, the author is adding something that is unique, either the perspective, the discussion, or something unique, a unique aspect of the crime itself that is now explored in this magazine. So this is incredibly unique in terms of everything that you're reading is either surprising, shocking, or a brand new revelation for somebody, even as, I thought as experienced as myself. So this is just a fantastic discovery for me, and I hope, I'm sure the audience, when they discover this, will think the same. Lee, I want to thank you very much for this interview, and again, let us know where people can contact you, and tell us about your website again. And if people want to contact you through Facebook or Twitter or whatever, let us know how they can do that.
Great. Thank you so much. So you can subscribe to the magazine or buy single issues in PDF format at www.serialkillerquarterly.com. And we've got all our back issues on there. If you want to get it in ebook form, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, D2D, most of those online book retailers. Now there's a contest that we're doing that I really have got to get across, and you can find this on our Facebook page. Just search for Serial Killer Quarterly. Essentially, when you get to the Serial Killer Quarterly page, the contest is pinned on the top, and this is what it is. This is a tremendous deal. So if you enter this contest and win, you will win, okay, ready for this? You're going to get signed copies of Body Count by Burl Barer, a signed copy of my book Rampage, a signed copy of Doctors Who Kill, Sadistic Killers, and Youthful Prey by Carol Ann Davis, a signed hardcover copy of Harold Schechter's novel on H.H. Holmes. You're going to get a signed copy of Karen Ciosia's fiction novel Kidnapped by the Cartel. You're going to get a Grinning Man Press T-shirt, and you're going to get a copy of Kevin M. Sullivan's new ebook on Richard Chase. So this is definitely a contest that you want to enter.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for mentioning that. That's I'm drooling already. I want to enter this thing myself. So
yeah, do
that's
it.
Great.
And, just all you have to do to get to that is go to the Serial Killer Quarterly page on Facebook, and you'll see the post pinned on there. It'll tell you what you need to do to enter this contest. And if you win, that's one hell of a prize package, in my opinion.
Right. I want to ask just maybe one last question. Why do you think that all these authors have lined up to be a part of this excellent magazine, this online magazine?
Because they like it as much as you do.
No, what I was alluding to is that based on the work that you have done, you're a meticulous researcher, very exhaustive in your research, and you are the author of Cold North Killers and Rampage. We're going to have you back real soon to talk about Rampage because I couldn't help myself. I had to dig in and start reading in some incredible stories. And what's really interesting. And so what I think is very flattering is that a Canadian in America attracting all these basically American, well, I mean, there are some Canadians, but basically the elite of American true crime is on board with your Serial Killer Quarterly, and it must be based on the respect that they have for you as a criminologist and author and now as a publisher. So I want to applaud you for this, and thank you very much for coming on and talking about this. And I want to congratulate you on Serial Killer Quarterly, and I want you to thank you very much and have a great evening.
Hey, thanks so much, Dan. And let's do a Rampage one, eh?
Absolutely. We'll talk to you in the near future. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night, my friend.
Good night. Good night.